The world expected routine diplomacy. A phone call between Donald Trump and Burkina Faso's young leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, was supposed to be nothing more than another exercise in American dominance, a reminder of who holds the cards. But within seconds, everything flipped. Trump began the conversation with his signature bravado. Confident, loud, certain that his words would set the tone. He spoke of power, of deals, of America's indispensable leadership. He framed the call as though Burkina Faso's future hinged on his approval. To many, it seemed inevitable that Traoré, a leader barely in his 30s, would bend to the pressure. But Traoré didn't bend. He didn't hesitate. He delivered a response so sharp, so uncompromising, that it silenced even Trump. It was a moment that no one saw coming, a moment that electrified not just Burkina Faso, but the entire world. Before we dive deeper, hit that subscribe button now. Because if you think this opening exchange was powerful, what comes next will leave you stunned, and you won't want to miss a second of it. Traoré's words were more than defiance. They were history being written in real time. His voice carried not just for Burkina Faso, but for an entire continent long underestimated, long silenced. In that instant, the young leader stood as a symbol of something larger: the end of submission, the rise of dignity. Witnesses to the call described an uncanny silence on the other end. Trump, the man known for interrupting, mocking, overpowering opponents, was struck quiet. And in that silence, the world felt the weight of a shift. Power was no longer flowing in one direction. The room may have been private, but the impact wasn't. Within seconds, what was meant to be just another display of American dominance turned into one of the most talked about confrontations in modern politics. And this was only the beginning, because what Traoré said next would send shockwaves across continents. The call between Trump and Traoré wasn't just another political footnote. It was gasoline thrown onto a fire already raging across Africa. The continent's youth had grown restless. They were tired of leaders who bent under pressure, tired of hearing their countries described in insults, tired of being treated as the world's afterthought. Trump, in their eyes, embodied that arrogance. Years earlier, he had dismissed African nations with crude slurs, cementing himself as a villain in the collective memory. So when news spread that he had called Traoré to set him straight, the expectation was clear. Another Western strongman scolding an African leader. But Traoré flipped the script. His sharp response wasn't just about himself. It became a statement for an entire generation. He wasn't speaking as a politician desperate for favor, but as a soldier turned statesman, declaring independence in the rawest terms possible. His words were oxygen for a continent gasping for respect. Social media lit up like wildfire. In Ouagadougou, young people blasted Traoré's quote from car speakers. In Lagos, Nairobi, Dakar, crowds shared the clip like a badge of honor. For them, this wasn't just politics. It was pride, and that pride carried weight far beyond. Burkina Faso, analysts began asking uncomfortable questions. Was this the dawn of a new African defiance? Could one young captain symbolize the unraveling of decades of Western dominance? The stakes had been raised. This wasn't about a phone call anymore. It was about narrative, about dignity, about who gets to speak and who must listen. And as the world leaned in, the spotlight shifted back to the so-called villain of the story, the man who had built his empire on dominance, now facing a backlash he never scripted. Donald Trump wasn't just a politician. He was a spectacle, a brand, a force of chaos that thrived on dominance. To his supporters, he was the ultimate outsider who spoke truth to power. To his critics, he was arrogance personified, a man who mocked the weak and glorified the strong. From the moment he entered politics, Trump carved out an identity built on humiliation. He called opponents childish nicknames, bulldozed debates with insults, and dismissed entire nations with a sneer. His infamous comment about African countries being shitholes wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a window into his worldview. This is why the rumor of his call to Ibrahim Traoré spread so easily. The world already believed it could be true. Trump's reputation as a man who looked down on Africa, who thrived on patronizing others, made him the perfect villain in a story yearning for a hero's defiance. For decades, America had spoken to African leaders with the tone of a teacher scolding students. Trump embodied that posture on steroids. His politics weren't about dialogue, they were about domination. He wasn't interested in listening, he was interested in winning, in commanding submission with sheer force of personality. But therein lay the irony. Trump built his empire on blurring the line between fact and entertainment. He came from the world of reality TV, where perception was everything. And when the viral clips of Traoré's savage response surfaced, Trump suddenly became the unwilling character in someone else's show. The narrative painted him not as the untouchable alpha, but as the man finally humbled, the smirk gone, the bluster silenced, the empire shaken. For Trump, this was the nightmare role reversal. The showman upstaged, the bully outbullied. And for millions across Africa, it was catharsis. They didn't need the story to be confirmed, they just needed it to feel true. But a villain is only as powerful as the hero who stands against him. And the question that spread next was simple. Who was Ibrahim Traoré? And how did a 36-year-old captain rise to embody the spirit of defiance for an entire continent? Ibrahim Traoré was never meant to be a global symbol. Born in Burkina Faso, far from the gleaming skyscrapers of global power, his path was forged in struggle. The son of ordinary people, he grew up in a country scarred by poverty, political instability, and the heavy hand of foreign influence. Yet from the beginning, those close to him said he carried a quiet fire, an unshakable belief that dignity mattered more than comfort. As a young man, Traoré chose the life of a soldier. The military was not just a career, but a calling. He trained with discipline, lived with humility, and earned the respect of his peers not through rank, but through conviction. To them, he was not the loudest voice in the room, but the one who spoke with purpose. Then came 2022. Burkina Faso was in turmoil, plagued by violence, corruption, and the erosion of public trust. The government faltered, people lost faith, and the nation seemed on the brink of collapse. That's when Traoré, still in his mid-30s, stepped forward. In a bold move, he led a coup that stunned the world. Many expected another power-hungry officer. Instead, they saw something different. A young leader speaking directly to the people, vowing to put sovereignty and dignity above all else. His speeches weren't polished, but they were raw. "We will not kneel," he declared, echoing the frustration of millions. Suddenly, Africa's youth saw themselves in him, not in his uniform, but in his defiance. That is why, when the story of Trump's call broke, Traoré fit the role of hero perfectly. He wasn't an old politician weighed down by compromise. He was the fresh face of resistance, the soldier who dared to stare down empires. And in that imagined clash, the world saw the embodiment of a new era. One where Africa would no longer whisper, but roar. The phone call began with the usual dominance. Trump's tone was brisk, almost dismissive. He spoke of order, of partnerships, of how Burkina Faso needed to align with American interests if it wanted stability. It was the same script he had used with countless leaders before. Loud, confident, dripping with the assumption that America's word was final. But Traoré didn't flinch. He listened, silent, his calm presence a counterweight to Trump's bluster. When he finally spoke, his words were sharp, but measured. "We are not children to be scolded. Mr. Trump, Burkina Faso will walk its own path." That single sentence shifted the atmosphere. Trump raised his voice, leaning on his trademark swagger. He reminded Traoré of America's military power, of aid, of the weight the U.S. carried on the global stage. To him, this was negotiation by intimidation. Yet Traoré didn't match volume with volume. Instead, he let Trump's words hang in the air, then dismantled them with a steady rhythm. He spoke of Africa's history, of exploitation and broken promises. He reminded Trump that dignity could not be bought, that sovereignty could not be traded like commodities. The escalation wasn't about insults. It was about truths. Trump pushed harder, but Traoré's calm refusal to bend only amplified the tension. Every response felt like a mic drop, every pause like a reminder that the old order was cracking. By the end of the call, it was clear this wasn't Trump's show anymore. For once, the spotlight had shifted, and the world was about to hear the words that turned a tense exchange into legend. The savage counterattack that left even Trump stunned into silence. The tension in the call had reached its peak. Trump was pressing harder now, raising his voice, layering threats with patronizing advice. He spoke of America's role as a protector, of how nations like Burkina Faso needed Washington's leadership to avoid chaos. To him, this was strength, a show of dominance. But for Ibrahim Traoré, it was the last straw. With a measured breath, he leaned into the silence that followed Trump's words, and then in a tone both calm and cutting, he delivered the line that would echo across continents. Africa is not a child. We do not exist to kneel. We exist to rise. And no empire, yours or any other, will dictate our future. The weight of those words crushed the room. Trump, who had built his reputation on quick comebacks and louder interruptions, suddenly had nothing. Those present described his face tightening, his jaw clenching, as if searching for a counterpunch that never came. For the first time, the king of spectacle found himself stunned into silence. And then came the moment that sealed it. Traoré ended with a single, unforgettable phrase. Burkina Faso is small, yes, but our dignity is larger than your threats. Remember this: empires fall, but the spirit of free people endures forever. The line was pure electricity. It was the kind of sentence destined for hashtags, headlines, and history books. Trump had no reply. When news of the exchange leaked, the internet erupted. Twitter filled with clips overlaid with Traoré's words. TikTok remixes turned his quote into rallying cries. Hashtags like "dignity over empire" and "your Traoré vs Trump" trended worldwide. Even in countries far from Africa, the moment resonated. Ordinary people saw in Traoré's words a universal truth. The powerless do not stay powerless forever. For millions across Africa, it wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about them, their frustrations, their pride, their longing to see a leader who refused to bend. Traoré had given voice to what they had always wanted to say. And for Trump, the self-styled master of dominance, it was a rare humiliation. The villain had been outperformed. The empire had been reminded of its mortality. But the call's impact didn't end there. The aftershock spread quickly, through parliaments, through media outlets, through living rooms across the globe. What began as a clash between two men was about to become a movement, and the ripple effect would shake far more than egos. The call ended, but its echoes thundered across the globe. Within hours, Traoré's words were no longer just a private exchange. They were a movement. On Twitter, hashtags blazed, "Miar Traoré's Trump," "Africa rises," "Dignity over empire." Memes flooded timelines, showing Trump's stunned silence next to Traoré's defiant quotes. TikTok edits layered his voice over drums, turning his words into an anthem. For Africa's youth, it was more than viral. It was validation. When the dust of the call settled, the lesson was clear. This was never just about one man versus another. It was about dignity against domination, sovereignty against intimidation, and the universal human demand to be respected. Traoré did not merely reject Trump's tone, he reframed the entire conversation. In his words, people heard a truth often buried beneath power politics, that a nation, no matter how small, carries within it the same right to pride and destiny as any superpower. For the young people of Africa, the lesson was personal. Traoré's stance told them they were not inheritors of weakness, but of resilience. For the rest of the world, It was a reminder that justice, sovereignty, and equality are not negotiable. They are the birthright of every nation. The call may have been brief, but its impact will last far longer. And as Traoré's words continue to echo, they remind us of a universal truth. True power lies not in domination, but in the dignity of standing tall. But the story doesn't end there, because what followed wasn't just reflection, it was a call to action. And so, history recorded not just a phone call, but a turning point. Traoré's response to Donald Trump was more than political theater. It was a declaration that Africa will no longer be spoken to, but spoken with. That dignity cannot be dictated. That even in a world of giants, the smallest nation can stand tall when led with courage. Moments like these ripple beyond politics. They ignite pride. They spark conversations. They force us to reimagine the balance of power. Because when one voice dares to break the script, it gives permission for millions more to rise. This is why Traoré's words matter, not just for Burkina Faso, not just for Africa, but for anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told to stay silent. His defiance is a reminder. Leadership is not about titles, but about truth. And now the question shifts to us. What do we do with this moment? Do we let it pass as just another viral clip? Or do we carry its energy forward into our communities, into our movements, into our own lives? If this moment inspired you, if it stirred something within you, don't let it fade. Share this story, let others feel the same fire, and add your voice to the chorus of change. Subscribe, stay connected, and be part of this growing movement. Together we prove that the fight for respect, for sovereignty, and for justice is universal and unstoppable. The call may have ended, but the echo, that will never fade.